I've never felt the slightest shame in admitting I have a bit of a soft spot for the Call of Duty campaigns. Sure, they may be short and are generally viewed as secondary compared to its massively popular multiplayer mode. But let's face it, in this long-running annualized series, one that now merely serves as a commercial cash cow, single player is the only facet where you may still detect the developer's passion to create something really cool. You can understand my disappointment when last year's Black Ops 4 skipped out on it entirely, all the more reason I was very excited when I heard that this year it'd be back and play a more important role than ever. Call of Duty Modern Warfare is Infinity Ward's attempt at reclaiming a status they had held for so long, being viewed as the definitive developer behind the franchise. Despite having laid the foundation for this series, as well as turning it into the phenomenon that it is today with the original Modern Warfare trilogy, there is no denying it, lately they had lost their claim to the throne. Fans would rather forget about the existence of 2013's COD Ghosts, while Infinite Warfare was a case of wrong time, wrong place. It suffered from an unfortunate choice of setting, taking place once more in the future at the peak of anti-gravity, wall running and boost jumping fatigue. I actually enjoyed its storyline quite a bit, but all these reasons caused Infinity Ward's last games to critically, commercially and in terms of fanbase reception underperform. As a result, the Modern Warfare reboot was officially announced earlier this year, but honestly, when I first heard about it, I wasn't quite sure how to feel. On one hand, of course, I absolutely loved the original trilogy. Modern Warfare 2 was my entry point to the franchise back in 2009, and I still consider it one of my favorite games of last gen. On the other hand, my mind couldn't escape the fact that this was clearly a choice made out of necessity rather than creativity, to rely on nostalgia because Infinity Ward could not afford another disappointment anymore. That being said, I always try my best to stay unaffected by personal feelings and give any game the benefit of the doubt. I purposefully took a very eyes-off approach and didn't really look up much footage, interviews or whatever else. Pretty much the only info I could not avoid came from games journalists who would so eagerly call what they had seen quote-unquote too controversial, but if anything, that only increased my overall excitement. If you'd ask me, Call of Duty is at its best when it is visceral, up close and conveys the chaos of war. So, last week I booted up the game and unabashedly dove into the campaign straight away. I've now acquired the Platinum Trophy and beaten it 3 times, so let's discuss what I thought. The campaign starts off pretty strong. A traditional stealthy approach through the forest instantly brings back memories of COD 4, resembling its all too familiar atmosphere, but eventually all hell breaks loose. The opening mission ends in gunfire and is followed up by an even more chaotic second one. Terrorists are attacking London and it's your task to defend civilians from men carrying large machine guns and wearing bomb vests on a suicide mission. They immediately highlight where this game undoubtedly raises the bar. Presentation-wise, it is highly immersive, with atmospheric lighting, great sound design, and easy to overlook, fantastic animations which make the experience feel that much more real. I remember there used to be a time where calling the Call of Duty games visually impressive was frowned upon, but I feel that both Sledgehammer and Infinity Ward have really managed to justify expectations for top-tier presentation. Take this combined with how this new Modern Warfare focuses on giving you a sense of immersion from a gameplay perspective too, and it makes certain missions truly stand out. I'm obviously talking about the infiltration sequences, where you're supposed to clear a house with your team, going through each room, eliminating targets one by one. Seriously, with the night vision goggles on, it's like I was watching one of those real-life operation videos, recorded by a camera strapped to a soldier's helmet. The pacing is deliberately slow and more importantly controlled here. It's meticulously designed so that whenever you've made sure the coast is clear and leave a room, you end up with your squad mates again and get a moment to breathe. Enemy behavior can be quite unexpected too. The most notable example is a situation where a terrorist peeks around the corner but then decides to crawl under the bed. Even on regular difficulty, I died twice here because I just wasn't prepared for this to be a possibility at all. Situations like these are where Modern Warfare succeeds in the goal it set out to deliver on, putting you in relevant, current-day situations and bringing a sense of realism unseen in a military game before. You're simply on your toes at all times, because even a seemingly harmless woman you think you have control over may end up grabbing a rifle out of nowhere. Later on, the same formula is made use of once more during a compound raid. Understandably so, because it's just a really cool experience. Another part where this slower and methodical approach is required is during mission 13, called Going Dark. In here, however, you're offered more freedom to decide how to tackle your objective. You can freely walk around a relatively large space and go to each destination in the order you wish. Additionally, there is a new mechanic where you have to make sure to stay in the dark with a little meter on the side that shows you if you are or not. I would carefully progress through the area, destroying every light source I could find on my way. Now, furthermore, there are a few other missions which also offer a change of pace, relying much more on stealth and even a few environmental puzzle elements to complete. In the third mission, you have to pick up large stone bricks to be able to pass guards and carefully take them out using a suppressed pistol put together with an oil filter from a car. At the embassy, you have to guide a woman through the building occupied by guards using CCTV cameras. There are flashback sequences, one where you try to find a way to escape a prison cell, and there is the one where you crawl through your own house as a small girl to defeat a Russian soldier. Actually, I realized it's just a clever remake of the Ellie vs David fight in The Last of Us. No wonder some of Naughty Dog's former leads were at the helm of this project. All jokes aside, these segments may be a little simplistic, but are meant to be a break from the regular gun combat that the campaign is otherwise still filled with. Because, other than the ports I just mentioned, gameplay-wise there is honestly little which stands apart. Sadly, traditional combat felt more dull than ever to me, because of boring mission objectives and a lack of variety, both in locations and spectacle. At the last stage of the embassy mission, you're meant to camp on the roof of a building for a good while, only for you to get out and do the same thing all over again on the building next to it. The mission it then follows up with is one where you use a sniper rifle, but are once again forced to stay hidden, bringing the pacing to a total halt. Fights just tend to be pretty standard, with a small arsenal of guns, and so are the few gadgets which rarely break up the action. You get a pointer to request drone strikes, or fly them into enemies and vehicles yourself. At one point you provide helicopter support from above, very reminiscent to the frequent AC-130 sections in the trilogy, but the sole occasion you make use of this lasted probably less than a minute. I did find myself really missing those giant blockbuster moments that the franchise has always been known for. Modern Warfare is a reboot, which in terms of story takes some of the characters we all know and love, but places them in all new situations and acts like the other games never happened. Captain Price is obviously back, steals the show with his presence alone, and helping him along are two fellow soldiers, Kyle and Alex. Cutscenes move incredibly fast, barely giving you the time to take the plot in. Looking at it from face value in hindsight, it's really not all that complicated to understand the events that transpire, but in the moment it moved very quickly. What doesn't help is how you're dealing with a range of factions to keep track of, from the Russians, Al-Qatala, the Urzikstan terrorists, as well as the rebels. Each of these groups treat all the others as their enemies and have their own motives for their actions. Farah is the fearless leader of the latter group, and you could say she's treated as one of the two main stars in this game. She's the character which every major plot device is somehow connected to. Sadly, some moments were a little hard to believe for me. It all starts with a gas shipment that is stolen, seemingly by the same Al-Qatala who terrorized London. Midway through the game, however, it turns out not Al-Qatala, but Hadir, Farah's own brother, was responsible instead, for little more reason than that, despite having served in his sister's command for as long as it has existed, he apparently doesn't like playing by the rules anymore, causing him to join the terrorists out of nowhere. In all these years, if there's one thing he should know above all other people, it's how much his sister despises Al-Qatala and the tactics they employ. The game establishes this literally as being at the core of Farah's mindset in the beginning, yet Hadir remains steadfast in his conviction that she would understand. Now, Russia is essentially painted as the big bad in this game, which has already led to many discussions about how this game even twists a certain historical event to make them appear responsible. I can understand both of the perspectives about a developer's creative freedom versus the frustration over tampering with history. It's an interesting conversation, but so large that I can maybe better save it for another time instead. Me personally, I mainly just found General Barkov an unconvincing villain, who didn't quite leave the impression that some of the previous ones did manage to. He's portrayed as purely evil, who without a distinct performance nor much screen time certainly won't be remembered for too long. Funnily enough, it was actually the ending which, maybe against popular opinion, left me most underwhelmed. Although, like anyone else, I had a smile on my face as Captain Price mentioned the names of Soap and Ghost, and I realized that Kyle was in fact Gaz all along, I also perceived it as cheap nostalgia bait. There had been no build-up to these two new characters becoming part of the team, and more importantly, it just reset the narrative and rendered the story of this first entry completely pointless. Alex had just received an unearned and on top of that totally anticlimactic off-screen death. I figured that Infinity Ward didn't see a role for him to play anymore, as it turns out the next game will be bringing many old friends back. Farah gets her desired revenge on Barkov, so her personal arc seemed finished as well. If all of this was just an unnecessary prelude to only give us the real deal in a few years, then I asked myself, why couldn't you deliver us that in the first place? However, having taken some time to let it all sink in, I've come to understand things may not be as finished as they seem. There is speculation going on that Alex may have survived this otherwise unimpactful death, and Hadia's fate remains unknown, having been captured by the Russians. If the sequel can cleverly play in on these theories, then I'll be the first to take back my thoughts. I guess for now, I'll just have to reserve judgment. But if one thing became clear to me after beating the campaign, it's that ultimately Call of Duty is Call of Duty. They are relatively casual experiences, which mechanically never differ too much from their predecessors and are just too short to deliver enough substance in story or character development that could truly raise the bar. Therefore, what can set an individual COD campaign apart is limited to just a few aspects, and this forms my biggest problem with Modern Warfare's campaign as a whole. A few of the missions I mentioned are cool, but they are practically the only ones that stand out from the rest. All that leaves me with are the previous campaigns to compare it to, and that's when I feel like it's missing out on a few fundamental components that made those other ones so memorable. Allow me to take you back in time for an example. You see, when I played Modern Warfare 2 for the first time in 2009, it was exactly what I referred to in the intro, a non-stop rollercoaster ride. One moment you'd find yourself climbing up on ice to reach a base, where you'd sneak around using a heartbeat sensor to detect enemies and escape on a snow scooter shooting bad guys left and right. Another time you'd fight your way through the colorful Brazilian favelas, an obliterated version of Washington, or you'd take on the impossible mission to free Captain Price from a Russian gulag as the place was about to be blown up. Above all that, the story would take twists and turns that came completely out of nowhere. I will never forget how I felt personally betrayed when I witnessed General Shepard killing Ghost as well as Roach, one of your playable characters. Damn sure did it feel satisfying to put a knife in his eye socket as payback by the end. Reinforced by its fantastic soundtrack, this campaign was meant to be emotional, in your face and shock you, going so far as to gain widespread mainstream media attention because of one highly controversial mission. I can't picture a better way the game could have made you feel hatred for its main antagonist Makarov, but having you take part in a gruesome terrorist attack as it happened is a design choice that simply takes balls, especially if you were to do it now with the norms defined by the media today. Modern Warfare 3 took this idea a step further and was just all-out chaos in a fight across the world, and therefore the hardest to make a comparison to. But even the original Call of Duty 4 from 2007, which tonally this new game is most similar and sometimes even pays homage to, is a more memorable experience thanks to a few unforgettable highlights. The Friday infiltration opening, the nuke explosion, taking control of the AC-130 for the first time, staying hidden among soldiers and all gillied up, making your way through Pripyat, the car escape and the shootout on the bridge. By no means am I trying to tell Infinity Ward to stay in its lane. I love it when a developer tries to create something deeper, more meaningful, something which tries to get the most out of this medium. But to me, it feels like this new Modern Warfare just desperately wants to be something it cannot be within the current boundaries it sets for itself. A grounded story will only ever pay off if there is enough room for characters to grow over the course of its runtime and lead to a satisfying conclusion. You can't have rapidly moving cutscenes within a short 5-hour story and expect people to vividly remember your characters. You can't get rid of all the spectacle if you're only gonna have a few interesting missions to replace it. I'm not gonna lie when I say I had hoped for the supposed controversial direction games media claimed this game would take to better come to fruition. That it would make absolutely no compromise in showing you how brutal war can be. Let's face it, we happen to live in a very gruesome world. A world where we saw regular beheading videos by ISIS, where terrorists shot up a concert hall in Paris, killed cartoonists for making light of their religion. A world with frequent horrible bombings in the Middle East and regular school shootings in the USA. Not a single scene in Modern Warfare came anywhere close to these things, nor what we already played 10 years ago in Modern Warfare 2's No Russian. Yes, this game is violent, but what it shows is far from controversial. Denying that just means you're looking away from the current state of the world. In fact, I would go even further. It is clear that this game actively tried to avoid controversy, taking the safe approach just to avoid any conflict. While it has no problem turning Russia into the big evil, it had to create a fictional country in the Middle East not to step on people's toes. There are even scenes hinting at an incoming horrible event which then take a sudden turn. It would not surprise me if the game purposefully cut out some parts following the backlash from the industry. Now of course, trying to shock for the sake of it is never a good thing, and the key here is that if you're gonna include some horrifying parts, you have to make sure it serves a purpose. That being said, to make up for the exclusion of over-the-top encounters, I had hoped the game would offer moments to truly make you think about some of the bigger issues around the world. In the end, like with any of the games, I obviously enjoyed Modern Warfare's campaign. I thought it had a few moments where it absolutely shined, and many that felt like the standard experience I was already used to. Is it the best Call of Duty campaign in a while? If you'd ask me, I'd personally have to answer with a definite no. None of Call of Duty's single players on the current consoles have proven to be as memorable as those of the last generation, but there are some which I'll still hold dearly in my heart. I think Infinity Ward actually did a better job with their previous game Infinite Warfare, but my personal favorite remains World War II, which made you truly form a bond with your small group of soldiers while telling a story grounded in history and in linear fashion, having you directly witness every setback endured by your squad and making you see how it affects their relation with each other. Nonetheless, I'm hoping Modern Warfare's reboot is a stepping stone to an even better sequel. One which sees the same potential this game might have done, but uses it to its fullest, delivering the campaign it deserves and will long be remembered. To make these videos possible, your support is vital. If you enjoy all the content I create, please consider supporting me over at patreon.com/robingaming. For just $1 per month, not only do you help me in bringing you high quality and fully independent content like this, but you also gain early access to each video and other cool rewards. In the current climate of YouTube, where sponsorships and clickbait are the norm, I hope I can count on your help to keep these videos going. Thanks for your support.